Welcome everyone to Psyched, and every Wednesday we talk a little bit about psychological experiments and different concepts of psychology. And joining me, as always, is Andrea Chu. Andrea, welcome to the show. And today we're going to talk a little bit about resilience, right? I mean, we had a couple of interesting conversations last week, especially with the Olympics. And when you think about the Olympics, right, as we closed that out last weekend, resilience is a key part of why people are successful and not so successful, right? Andrew, talk to us about resilience and what we're going to talk about today.
All right. Okay. So I think we hear this word a lot, and it comes together with another word, another term called grit, right? Grit and resilience is used very widely in a lot of things, and a lot of people say that resilience is a skill, right? That successful people have, people who are really great at their jobs, at their relationships, bouncing back from adversities and life circumstances. Those people are what we call as resilient people. So today we're going to explore a bit more of what resilience is and whether it is tied to physical strength, right? So in sports, we hear this thing called resilience training as well. So we're going to explore a bit more about whether that actually makes a person much more resilient compared to somebody who doesn't even do sports or, physical activities. And we have an exciting guest to invite later on, and we are so excited to bring her with us on this show.
So maybe before we get there, let's talk a little bit about resilience. I mean, at least what I know about resilience is it's the ability to recover from or adjust easily. At least this is what the dictionary tells me, to adjust easily to misfortune or to change or to adversity or to whatever befalls and hits us, right? Is that the understanding of what resilience is?
I think there's a lot of perspectives on resilience. We are so used to more of the definition of bouncing back from an adversity or a life circumstance. But the truth is, resilience is very multifaceted. There's a lot of things going on, right? So, for example, when I was reading through what psychologists term as resilience, even them, they have different types of components of resilience itself. So, for example, let me give you a few. They talk about faith and spirituality. They talk about people with a sense of humor, being able to laugh at their misfortune and bounce back for reasons that are useful for them. That's also resilience. And it's also things like building that when you hit a roadblock, you're able to go across it or break through, as we call it. That is also part of resilience. So it's actually very multifaceted. And there's something called the 7 C's of resilience by Dr. Ginsberg. So he's actually a clinical psychologist and also a very famous child psychologist. And he talks about these 7 C's as components of resilience, such as confidence, competence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control as key components on building resilience, especially in children and teens. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it before, and there are many other models out there. I think resilience, to answer your question, Roshan, is very multifaceted. There's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think one thing we can agree on is basically breakthrough, bouncing back, moving forward from failures and stuff.
And I found a very interesting modern definition of resilience, like advancing despite adversity, And obviously, we're gonna talk a little bit more with our guest today. We have got psychologist and Dr. Elaine Fernandez will be joining us shortly, I think. Maybe you want to briefly introduce our guest, and I think this is the ultimate resilient expert, right? Yeah. So who do we have today?
Okay, so we have Elaine Fernandez, and she actually was a lecturer of mine, and she's going to be a soon-to-be Muay Thai fighter in the ring someday soon. And that's why we invited her, not just because for her expertise, but her newfound passion for Muay Thai. And she's the best person I can think of when it comes to resilience and the training that she goes through. So Miss Elaine, she is a social psychology researcher. She's also a senior lecturer in Help University. She used to be the head of department at that time when I was in university. And she also does a lot of research on, diversity, social identity, certain components of social psychology. And she also does talent assessments for recruitment and development currently. She does competency-based interviews and psychometric assessments. She looks at, candidates' profiles, reports, identifying a lot of things. So she's very multifaceted too, from Muay Thai to, she does it all. So let's welcome Elaine. Give a round of applause in the comment section if you can. And so Miss Elaine, before I drop off, I think I'm going to pose a question to you first, and then Roshan will continue on. Why do you love Muay Thai? Why did you join Muay Thai in the first place?
Okay, hi guys. Thanks for having me on the show. That's a really good question, and I think it ties into the topic today because I actually started Muay Thai as a stress response. So I was experiencing a lot of workplace stress at the time, and there was a lot of things factoring in, including a lack of physical fitness. And I was looking for something to do that would really take me outside of my comfort zone, that was so different from anything that I was doing in my day to day life. And I grew up being very afraid of martial arts. I couldn't watch boxing on TV because it's too violent. Um, and so when I drove past a Muay Thai gym one day, I thought, you know what? If I'm really going to do something that's going to shake me up, this is probably it. So that was actually what spurred me trying out Muay Thai. And yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I want to zoom into resilience, and so what does resilience mean to you? And I'm assuming that it does have some impact on success, anxiety, performance, and really that's why there's so much being written on resilience today and grit, right? I mean, from Angela Duckworth's work to the KIP project and so many other things, right? We find so much of research now and a lot of focus on that, right? So talk us through that. What is resilience to you, and what kind of impact does it really have on success, anxiety, performance, and other key indicators?
Okay. So I think Andrea did a good job covering sort of the various bases about what resilience is, and the definition that you brought up as well, advancing it despite adversity, is pretty much our general understanding of what it is. And why it's important is because there is nobody in this world, regardless of how successful you currently are, that hasn't experienced some form of setback or adversity, whether it's in your personal life or professional life. So the ability to know how to navigate that without, falling prey to depression, anxiety, and all of that is really, really important to help us move forward despite any setbacks that we have, which is why we are so focused on helping people build those skill sets that increase resilience so that regardless of what they encounter on a day-to-day basis, although they will experience it, they will know what to do to get through it. So that is essentially why it's important to focus on and why it's such a hot topic today.
Okay, and we got to get some call out. I think some of your students, I think Brian Tay says, woohoo. Call out to you. There is Ayani who says hi to all, and there's a guy who says waxed. Don't know who that is, but says can't wait and super excited to what's happening today. And today we really want to talk a little bit about resilience in sports, right? I mean, with the end of the Olympics, and we talk a lot about athletes and their resilience, right? The ability, because so much of stress, right, in that moment of time. And we had Simone Biles, I guess, with her tweeties or twitchies and or whatever you call that. I mean, some new things we learned about sports anxiety and that resilience in that form of adversity. And one of the things I think is that we've been told, at least when I was growing up, say play sports is good for you. It'll help you build resilience. It'll help you build character. I mean, we constantly say sports builds character, right? But does it? I mean, scientifically speaking, and maybe this is where we zoom into yourself as a psychologist. Does physical activities or sports really build resilience, and how does it build resilience?
Okay, so the research does indicate that physical activity and participation in sports and all of that does have a positive impact on resilience and all the skills that are sort of associated with it, like stress management, that sort of thing. And the way it does it is through several mechanisms. So neurophysiologically, it does have an impact. So you see increases in endorphins, which is the pleasant hormones, where the feel good hormones, a reduction in cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So through those very simple biomechanisms, you're already setting yourself up for being a better frame of mind to deal with whatever is happening at the moment in time. So just from a neurophysiological point of view, there are positive effects. But apart from that as well, if you're especially if you're quite serious with sports, there's things that go into training that actually give you a roadmap for how to deal with other problems. So for example, scaffolding to get from one skill level to another, so you build on small components in order to help you deal with a bigger component later on or achieve a bigger result. You also have smaller milestone goals to achieve to get you to a bigger, to your long-term goal. So all of this is inbuilt into a lot of training programs that athletes go through that can be applied in the workplace, can be applied in in education, in how you approach your studies. So there's a lot of transferable skills that people who are serious about sports learn through the process that they can actually apply in other facets of their lives. So there are biological responses, but there's also skill sets that you learn as a result of sports.
Interesting. And yourself, I mean, your involvement with Muay Thai, was it because of the need to develop resilience, or is just, I mean, you did mention it was more of something that you wanted to just do, right?
Yeah.
Did it help you? I mean, in terms of resilience?
Oh yeah, I mean, okay. So one of the key ways of building resilience is facing your fears. So it's one of it's a larger encompassing method of building resilience. And so in this was a very good example of facing fear. Martial arts is very physically demanding under the best of circumstances, and I was not physically fit at all. So apart from being afraid of violence, just the physical component was very daunting. But what I learned through persisting at it and just going again and again and again is that you actually build up a sense of self-efficacy, a sense of competence over time, that what you previously thought you couldn't do, you are proving to yourself week on week that you can do. So what that shows you is that you are able to work through adversity. And that is a very important part of resilience, a very important component of resilience. If you notice in the 7 C's is number 1, the competence. Although yes, they're all equal, but there's a reason why that sense of competence is really important, because it tells us that we have the capability of moving past something. So we are not just stuck there. Even though right now I feel stuck, I do feel like I can do what it takes to move past this feeling of being stuck. And that's really important for us to have that psychological sense of our own ability to overcome something.
And you talk about this overcoming your fear of failure, and I was just listening to Misha Paula, who did this 100-day fear of failure challenge, and then about a couple of years ago, I met up with this guy called Jia Jiang, who also did this thing called rejection therapy, like 100 days of being rejected, and his biggest fear is that of being rejected, and I find it very interesting. And when you say that this ability to face your fears actually helps you to build resilience, codify it a bit for us. What portion of it and how, and what should we be looking for? I mean, we should look for, exactly what you did, right? Facing your fear of Muay Thai and going and doing it anyway. What kind of advice would you give us for us to try to do exactly what you did, and why it's important for us to do that?
Okay, so first of all, I wouldn't say that everybody should try it straight away, because you do need to be in a certain psychological space to be able to handle something like that. So like the 100 days of rejection, if you're not prepared to go through that, then it's probably going to backfire. So I would say be a little bit cautious about how you go with this. But if you do have something that you want to face and you find that it's very difficult to face, the first thing that you probably want to do is try to find a small way of doing it. So like I guess in the therapeutic setting, if you're seeing a therapist, if they do exposure therapy with you, for example, they will gradually build you up. So it's a gradual desensitization to whatever is causing you that fear. The reason why I was able to stick to the Muay Thai as a method of this was because the gym that I went to was extremely supportive. The environment was such that I didn't feel judged for my physical incapabilities at the time. People were willing to teach you, and so that created a positive environment where I could face that fear without having other things coming into play, like feeling judged and stuff like that. So I would say that if you're going to try something like facing your fear, you might want to do it with someone who's able to provide you with that social and moral support, because it's not an easy thing to do. And you don't want to fall prey to other things that could impact you psychologically while you're trying to go ahead and do that.
So you say, it's good to do it in communal communities, but can you do it alone? Many of us are stuck, in our little pens in this lockdown situation. But can it be done alone? Can we build resilience? That's one example, I guess, is to overcome your fear by taking something or getting into a sport. And maybe there are other things you can share with us in terms of how to build resilience. But is this something? Is there opportunity for us to do it alone, and is that effective at all?
Yeah, so you can actually work on sort of different aspects of resilience on your own. A lot of them overlap with stress management and stuff like that. One of the more effective ones that is supported by research is actually those reflective writing exercises, where you're working towards changing a narrative. So how you see a situation. So those things can be done on your own, and there's a lot of tutorials online that you can check out. A lot of worksheet activities that psychologists have put out there for people to work with. But really, the goal there is for you to learn how to see beyond your current evaluation or interpretation of a situation to an alternative way of viewing it, where you have more control in that environment. You have more options that you can work with rather than what you're just seeing right now. So those are things that people can actually do on your own if they're motivated to do that. But the reason why we usually involve other people is when we are faced with adversity, sometimes that tunnel vision can be quite difficult to come out of on our own. So that's why a therapist helps, a friend helps, but there are plenty of activities out there that you can work on your own, and don't require you to do Muay Thai.
Yep. Martin Seligman, did the whole research on what we call learned helplessness. And one of his quotes talks about resilience, and he says this, in cases of a serious lack of resilience, it leads to helplessness and seeing oneself as a victim of circumstances. Talk us through that. I mean, that can happen, right? Ultimately.
Yeah. So when people are faced with situations that seem to not have a positive outcome for them, where they don't see a way out of that situation, and if it's a chronic situation, like for example, if I am trying to find a job and I'm constantly getting rejected, for example, that can lead to this perception that the problem is me, right? And if the problem is me, and there's something innate in me that I cannot change, then that's going to make you feel like no matter what you do, you're not going to succeed, you're not going to get a job. So the idea here is that you want to change that narrative and focus on things that are actually within your control. And that's part of the idea of reframing, of thinking about problems in new ways, because when we are faced with a similar outcome and it's a negative outcome over and over again, it reinforces this idea that we are not going to get past it, and we want to break that cycle of reinforcement, basically.
Great. A couple of comments coming. Naveen, who says that's great and thanks you for that. A comment from Sashi, who says I often forget how silly I am being when I'm trying a new sport activity with a friend. And I think he tags a couple of his friends. And I want to zoom in on the scientific evidence, right? So I mean, I'm sure there are a number of different scientific evidence or findings, and in terms of research that is out there in terms of resilience. Would you be able to share a couple of that for us at this point in time?
So a lot of the research has been done on specifically in physical activity and resilience. They've looked at things like group exercise, how they have actually impacted certain resilience outcomes. They've looked at COVID-19, especially in the last year and a half. There's been research on physical activity and COVID-19, resilience in COVID-19, and how that has affected depression, anxiety, and all of that. And there have been a lot of positive results for people who are more physically active being more resilient towards the impact of the lockdowns. And again, this boils down to several factors. Of course, there's a health factor involved, especially when you're constantly cooped up inside and your daily steps and all of that are lower. The healthier you are, the more capable you feel of dealing with the day-to-day problems that arise. But also there is that element, as I mentioned before, of the endorphins that people get. Physical activity gives you a sense of routine, which can help when a situation feels like it's never ending. Having that day-to-day routine helps people be grounded and focused every single day. And also it helps with emotion regulation, mood regulation. All of this help us recenter ourselves and then focus better on the subsequent activities. So even in a pandemic situation where levels of depression and anxiety are increasing across the globe, having an element of physical activity does seem to actually help manage that with those people who are physically active. So, yeah.
That's good. That's great. I mean, some good insights. We've got Alvin who says, thanks, great insights, Elaine. We've got a comment, I guess, / question. I think resilience from Brian, who says, I think resilience is like a muscle. In order to train this muscle, you need to train and habitually use it. But when we use a muscle to work out, we're essentially tearing it and weakening a bit. So, he adds, so we need to rest enough, and like Miss Elaine says, a safe environment and support group to allow us to heal and get more resilience. Your thoughts quickly on that comment from Brian?
Absolutely. I think Brian is spot on, and it's what I mentioned before, especially when you're facing your fear, for example, if that's the route that you're taking. It's going to beat you down at some point, right? You're going to feel like, I can't do this. Like for me, there were times I was wondering what I'm doing to myself. After 20 minutes of warm up, I'm already dying. So, but having people there to say, oh, you can do this, or even if you have a setback, that's fine. Just get up and try again. Having those in place actually are what helps you move through that a little bit more easily. Some people can do it on their own, but we are social creatures for a reason. It is part of our need, belongingness. And so having people around you to support you is very important.
Fantastic. Just to summarize, I think you talked about some of these ways to increase resilience, on how to reframe our thinking, how to, the sleep piece or the sports piece, and also positivity. I think those are the couple, and I think we will probably talk a little bit more on resilience in a bit. We have a question, and then I'm going to take a quick short break. What if you're tired? Should we still push on and do the exercise or listen to our body? Is there a way to identify whether it's laziness or actual fatigue?
Great question, and this is something that I struggle with as well, because I think one of those things that those of us who like sports or like to be physically active are bad at is knowing when to rest, because rest feels like a cop out. How do you take rest? But it's very important to understand how physical fitness actually works, and that your body is in need of rest in order to recover, in order to become better. So it's important for us to recognize this and incorporate rest days into our week, so that we are not telling us, not going with this, how do I feel at this point in time? But you can also know whether you're fatigued or not if you try a little bit. So let's say you're not sure, just pick up that dumbbell. You can tell very quickly whether it was laziness or fatigue, because your body will respond accordingly. If you're actually lazy, the workout will become a lot easier as it progresses. But if it's fatiguing, you're going to find that you are struggling more than you normally would in a similar set of circumstances. So that's already a good indicator, and you should stop. The minute you try and you feel extra fatigue, don't carry on the workout. It's not a bad thing to give up something when it's bad for you at that point in time. And that's another thing about resilience that's important to recognize, knowing what to let go of and when to let go of it, so that you're not continuing to batter yourself when it's not necessary for you to do so.
Yeah. It's like muscles, you destroy it completely, right? But we want to talk. We're going to take a short break quick in a bit. But one of the things we want to talk a little bit is organizational culture. How do you build a resilient organizational culture? And George Everly in an article in Harvard Business Review, he talks about a couple of factors like encouragement, support, mentoring. These are critical factors in terms of building an organizational culture of resilience. We're gonna come back and we're gonna talk a little bit of organizational culture and how to do that. We're gonna take a short break, and in the break we're gonna showcase Mentor Cloud, a mentoring tool, as George mentioned. It's a great tool to enable resilience to be built in the organization. So we'll take a quick 30-second break, and we'll be right back after this with Elaine Fernandez. Welcome back to Psyched. We're with Elaine Fernandez and Andrea Chu is joined us back today. Andrea, welcome back to the show. Great to have you. Couple of comments from our audience. Krishanti says, great points for me to validate my current lifestyle. I think it's for all of us, right? Andrea too, right? I think Andrea needs a bit of exercise, but she's moving house, so she's getting a lot of exercise this week. That's fun, So if you want to have a form of exercise, you don't want, just move houses, right? Or move location. Whole bunch of things. Esther Tay says go to Brian and some of the comments that are coming out there. And we want to zoom in on organizational culture at this point in time. And Andrew, you have a quick announcement before we move into that organizational culture piece?
Yes, correct. So for the video you watched just now, we are going to have a new show tomorrow, I think. We have for mentorship, right? So the importance of mentoring and whether mentoring is something right for you at this point of time in your life. So please tune in to Leaderonomics for that live show. Yeah, so that's just the quick announcement.
And where is the live? What time is the live show, Andrea?
I'm not really sure, Sashi. What time is the live show?
All right, we'll figure it out.
1 p.m. It's 1 p.m.
1 p.m.
Right,
Malaysia. 1 p.m. Malaysia. 12 noon Indonesia. All right. So culture. Andrea, shall we zoom into culture and building a resilient culture?
I think my first question would be, what is this application of resilience in the workspace? Right, we talk about resilience a lot because it is usually like a life event that happens, very personal, right? It's very like it's between me and you and me against the world. But in terms of workplaces, what does this mean? What does resilience actually do?
Okay, so building a culture of resilience really is about building work or teams or people who are themselves resilient, right? So a lot of the problem with, I guess, the way some organizations approach this is by basically throwing stress management seminars at their staff and hoping that they learn something from it, right? But as we talked about before, resilience is actually best built in environments that are themselves supportive, that recognize that adversity happens, but people do best with adversity when they feel like they are being supported through it, right? And they are able to learn those competencies as they go along. So in order for people to be able to implement some of the stress management strategies that we like to throw around, it's also important for organizations to recognize when, their staff might need a boss who understands what they're going through and is willing to listen to what they're going through and is also willing to provide support. If you say, oh well, everybody has to go through adversity, you just have to learn how to deal with it. That's true, but it also doesn't give people the sense that you are walking that journey with them. So an organization that wants to build a culture of resilience needs to show their staff that they are not leaving their staff on their own to grapple with what that means, but is willing to put the work in together with the staff, not just to look at what staff can individually do to improve on situations, but what the organization can do as well to scaffold some of these changes that are needed to help people overcome certain situations. So it's a collaborative effort to help people with the skills, but from the point of view of the organization, the openness to look and see what is actually causing adversity that doesn't need to be there. What is actually within the organization's control to change, to amend, to respond to feedback so that people feel supported in their work, while also practicing resilience on their own. So it's kind of a two-way street. Like if you tell people we want you to build your skill sets to be more resilient, but then we're just, everything that is around you that is affecting you negatively and is ineffectual and is actually hindering your work, we don't want to do anything to change that. If you have that kind of mindset, then you can't build a resilient culture. So it has to be collaborative, and people who are more experienced, who have had experience of working through certain things, can actually provide. I believe the citation that you mentioned had mentoring as one of the elements, and it really does help, because what people lack who are not resilient, sometimes what they lack is a roadmap, an idea of how to deal with adversity, not like a step-by-step guide to deal with individual problems, but how do I approach a problem? What questions can I ask? What questions have you asked before that have helped you figure something out, have helped lead you to a solution? So that mentoring process is very, very important so that you can give people skills that they otherwise may not be able to acquire on their own. So yeah, so having those structures in place and that willingness on the part of the organization to put in effort too is really important.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good insights that you share, and I totally agree, right? When the pandemic hit last year, you can see a lot of what we call as emerging leaders or young managers who were picking up the pieces, and instead of like you mentioned, throwing certain stress management workshops and virtual team building and stuff like that, they actually just sit down with the entire company and talk through what's happening with the pandemic. And that empathetic environment is what creates people and that support, like you mentioned, which is one key thing in resilience. I think the other one that you mentioned was what's that called? Having a structure, right? A process instead of just that inspirational level or the support. It's something very crucial because in our CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, they actually break down the processes so clear that it can be manageable by the person. And I want to share something that I found interestingly. It's called the ABCDE model. It follows the CBT for anxiety treatment. Usually we call it the cognitive ABC model, but this is something that is very targeted for building resilience in coaching and also in therapy. And it talks about how you start with the event or the situation, the activating event or the trigger, and then you think about all the beliefs that helps you think of the event in such a way, right? And then you look at the consequences, which is usually what happens when you do certain things or what happens if you react a certain way to a certain event. And then you dispute, which is something very interesting. Usually we don't dispute our own beliefs, right? We just accept our worldview, and we just forge through whatever we learned. And what you mentioned just now about reinforcement, that's where it comes in, right? Because if you don't dispute it, you're just going to reinforce a negative consequence that you've already had. And lastly is exchange. I think that's very key also. Being able to adapt, being able to is going to help us have that very clear process of what to do next. And I believe that mentors are very important because role model is also another key part of resilience. If we are not going to be inspired by all these leaders who have bounced back, have breakthroughs, lost their legs, their limbs, their hands, and everything, and still continue climbing the mountain, most likely we will not be climbing the mountain too. So I think it's like there's so many things in resilience that's really key. And it's also very exciting to see some organizations who embed it in the culture even before the pandemic has hit. And that's why they can survive now, because they have a group of people, like you mentioned, individuals who are resilient themselves. I think that's very interesting. I think the next question is a cheeky question. So what about those people who we talk about multifacets of resilience? But I'm very, very interested because I'm gonna call myself out on live show, but I'm not physically active. I don't like to do a lot of sports. But I do think that people who are not physically active or have no sports in their life are still resilient. What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree. I mean, like I mentioned before, sports and exercise are tools, right? They're not necessary, although they are very helpful, and I think they provide a good foundation, right, to work with. So if you're physically fit, for example, or you're healthy, then your body isn't going to be working against your mind in that sense, right? So it's more about health than necessarily being able to run 100 kilometers, for example. But assuming that the person who's not physically active is also still relatively healthy, still has other healthy habits like eating well, sleeping well, and so on, yes, it's entirely possible for people to be resilient without needing to do Muay Thai or play badminton or go running every day. It's entirely possible. So, but the things that you would do might be different. So for like I mentioned earlier, like reflective writing, journaling, that's one way some people do it. People do meditation. You don't have to do yoga if you consider it as a physical activity, but meditation exercises You're breathing, like taking that time every day to center yourself. Learning how to practice self-compassion is a huge thing. What sports would do would give you that opportunity to put that into practice more than, let's say, if you didn't do any other kind of work. But if you have something that you're really into, like for example, like I know you're really into music and art and stuff like that, so in that domain where there is opportunity for you to fail, there's opportunity for you to have self-compassion or learn how to be self-compassionate. So those are transferable to other areas of your life if you can learn how to be that in that domain that you are passionate about. So self-compassion is a huge component of resilience, because or feeds into resilience a lot, because what happens to us during adversity is that we feel very beat down. We feel like we are failures, and we are unable to progress because, well, this is all I'm able to do, right? That's a sense of that. Having self-compassion actually acknowledges that it's okay for us to feel like this. It's okay for us to fail, but that doesn't mean that it's who we are. It doesn't mean that we have to internalize the failure or internalize the situation. And having that sense of separation between the failure and me as an individual will give me a lot of mental space to identify things that I can do to move forward. But if I conflate the failure with myself, then what else can I do? I only have me to work with, and if me sucks, then I will stay suck.
We're done.
So basically what that the self-compassion does is create that mental buffer and between us and failure, and help us recognize that we are capable of moving past a failure, and that's why it's okay to fail.
And I think this is a quote I live by, and I share this with a lot of people as well. It's so important to distinguish failing and being a failure, right? It's very two different things. Yeah, and there's a book called The Resilience Factor. Karen Ravich and I think Andrew Shat. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but in 2002, they identified 5 typical emotions that are associated with the lack of resilience. So anger, sadness or depression, guilt, anxiety or fear, and embarrassment. And it's interesting because resilience is also it's an emotional process as well. It's not as robotic as some people think. You just go for training and that's it, you have resilience in order to be resilient, not just whatever that's happening outside of you, but also within. But at the same time, I think Michelle Obama had a quote. She says that grief and resilience are never too far apart. They are usually they come together. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I was going to mention, I think you mentioned the 5 emotions that are linked to a lack of resilience. I would take it a little bit further, because I think experiencing those emotions are perfectly normal. So if you fail, feeling guilt, shame, embarrassment, all of these things are very, very normal human responses to not living up to our or other people's expectations. So having those emotions in and of themselves doesn't make you not resilient. It's whether you allow those emotions to then affect how you proceed. If you allow yourself to give in to these emotions and stay there, right? And not see them for what they are, which is just a response to a situation, right?
Yep.
So if something is merely a response, it means that you can accept that it's there, but they don't have to dictate how you act or what you choose to do after that. So I think that's why what Michelle Obama says makes a lot of sense, because grief and resilience coming together is resilience is a response to an adversity, right? So there's no point in being resilient if there's no adversity. it doesn't,
It doesn't make sense.
yeah, for one to happen, the other is necessary. So being okay with that and accepting that this is going to be a part of the process is a very big step forward, actually, towards becoming a more resilient person, because already from the start, you're framing things correctly for yourself and not blaming yourself or beating yourself up for feeling bad for failing. I think sometimes when you say, don't say that I'm a failure, or sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to feel better when something goes wrong because we want to be a resilient person. But resilience isn't about how you feel necessarily. It's about what you're able to do despite how you feel. So I think that there's a very important distinction there, because a lot of why people don't get past an adversity is because they have this additional pressure of, oh my gosh, I'm not able to get past this. I'm not a resilient person because I feel down, I feel depressed, I feel like I blame myself, right? So that's an additional layer of burden that you're adding to yourself there. So that's why that recognition, that self-compassion is really, really a huge part of the process.
And I agree with that, right? Even in organizations as well, when you throw stress management techniques just like that, that is that additional layer of like a ceiling to really be resilient. The more you give them these things when they don't need it, the more they feel they need it, and then that stress comes, and then you have the technique that doesn't really help.
Or it feels like an
And
expectation, yeah.
yeah, correct.
Okay, I gave
That
you this,
doesn't help.
why you can't use it? What's wrong with you? How come you don't know?
I
Yeah.
give you the resources where you still like that. And that's
Yes.
very interesting in organizational perspective, right? I mean, we have something called the science of transforming organizations. And we also talk about these 4 areas that we need to sort of clear out, even think about individual perspectives. There is an organizational not model but components that needs to be looked into, and I agree with that. And I think I have a question for Roshan as he joins us back in, and he comes back to the physically active. I think everybody's trying to convert me to do some physical exercise, but basically there's a lot of research to show that people who are physically active usually have higher levels of success in their lives, whether it's work and stuff. And on the same side, people who are more successful tend to put in at least a few minutes a day to do some kind of physical exercise. I think Roshan, you I think run at least 30 minutes a day every day. At least he tries to do that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
And do you think
I
that
do.
and do you think that really helps with your psychological resilience as well?
I think it does. Like, I think it's not so much the running in itself. Like, I think it's the discipline, right? So, one of the things I find that's very interesting is that I force myself to do about. Last time it used to be 10,000 steps, but now it's about 13,000 steps. So I push. So, I come back at, sometimes pre-COVID, I come back at 11 o'clock at night after meetings, and I realize I've done 9,000 steps and I still got 4,000 to go. And I said, I don't care. I got to do 13, right? So at 11:30 at night, actually, I'm there running my 30 minutes to get to my 13,000, right? And I realized one of the interesting things is it's not so much just about the fit. It's about, you make a commitment to yourself. And I think it's part of resilience, right? It's to be able to then honor that and make it happen. And it gives you so much ability to know that, when I make a commitment on something, I'm going to honor it and I'm going to do it, right? And even if it's a commitment to myself, right? As an individual, right? And sometimes you break it, like I think yesterday I only did like 10,000 or 11,000 steps. And, I was like, I was like, I had to, we had this big investment thing that I had to get done. I'm like, okay, I forgive myself, but, I better make it up and get 15,000 or 17,000, 16,000 in another few days and make sure at the end of the week, I still get my 13 times, whatever the number is, times 7, 1,000 steps, right? So to me, I think, for me, it's not so much, I think there is a form of that, but I think the self-discipline plays a big role in that also. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Elaine.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think one of the things that people focus too much on, especially when it comes to physical activity, is motivation. You're not going to be motivated every day, trust me. And some of the things that you have to do are not motivating. They're boring. They're tedious. Like, I don't want to do drills, but you know that they're an important part of getting better at something. And by doing it and just getting out there and just doing it, you teach yourself that you can. And when it comes to your work or it comes to your personal life, there's some things that you just don't want to do, but you know is necessary. So now you've taught yourself that you know that you are able to actually do things that you don't want to do. So that self-efficacy, that knowledge, that self-knowledge that you gain about your ability to work when you really don't want to work is very, very crucial to giving you that that boost you need, even when you're not motivated to do something. So I completely agree that discipline is a really important thing that you learn from being physically active. Because it is not something people want to do, trust me. I know that 11:30 thing, I'm very, very sure you did not want to get out there and run or get on that treadmill 100%. You just want to crash. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be that extreme for everybody, for sure. It just depends on your own personal goals and what you think you want to be able to accomplish. So even if it's just, 5 minutes a day, I want to make sure that I do a bunch of squats. That can be just like the first thing. Before I sit down to work, 20 squats, and then sit down and work. But what that's telling you is that it's just giving you a habit, right, of doing something, and then slowly you'll find, hey, 20 squats so easy lah. Maybe tomorrow I try 30, and then you slowly level up lah. So I think that's also part of resilience, right? Like Brian, I see a comment there, but he mentioned earlier as well. It's like a muscle that you have to train, and with any kind of training, you don't go from 0 to 100 in your first class, right? You will die 100%. So it's the same thing with
and I think it's a very important point. I think one of the things is I about maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe even longer, maybe 8 years ago, I said, okay, I need to build some muscles. So I got involved in the gym, and it was when I had a sabbatical, and I said, look, every day I'm going to do this, right? And you look back after 2 years and 3 years, like nothing changed. You didn't feel it. But fast forward 7, 8, 9, 10 years, then you see a little bit of change. It's like, okay, I don't look as bad as I did before, and I think they're changing now, but it's 7-10 years, and sometimes I think that's what resilience is, right? It's that ability to take that long game, right? You're playing that long game, and it's not the little wars that we're looking at, the instant gratification, but it's really having that long game, and sometimes we cannot see it, but we have to have the faith to say, okay, it's going to happen at some point in time, and I think that's where it's really, really tough, because it's about playing that long game, and not many of us can envision that long game. And even while you're there, 3-4 years seems very long, but that's and even now I'm like, where's that six pack that I thought like 7-10 years ago I would get after all these workouts and so
But
on.
that's really interesting that you bring up the long game as well, because we all have goals, right? Regardless of whether it's fitness or anything else. And what I realize is also very important is for us to widen the metrics that we use to define success, to define progress, because we are often very, very tunnel vision about what it means to succeed, right? So, like for me, for example, if my goal was losing weight, I only focus on the scale. But if I only focus on the scale, if I don't see changes on the scale, I'm going to get very, very demotivated.
Upset.
And it's very hard to keep going. But if you think about fitness, there's so many other metrics that you can use. It's like, can I run another 100 meters more than I did yesterday? Can I pick up a 1 kilo higher of a weight today than I could yesterday? Is my shirt getting a bit looser? Am I able to be a little bit more thoughtful in the food choices that I make? Right? Or am I more aware of what I'm putting in my body? All of these are other metrics that you can use to measure physical fitness. And it's the same thing with other elements of success, right? What does it mean to be successful? Is it being able to retire by 45? Or is it, helping somebody, mentoring somebody along the way, helping somebody else get to where they want to go? There's so many ways that you can define things, and learning that ability to see options is very, very important towards helping you get to your long game, and also learning that positive mindset, that optimism, that giving you things to be more hopeful about in terms of your progress.
Yeah. And as a great comment by Proloy, who talks about it is about realizing the term sweet pain. It's like growing to this sweet pain, and I don't know whether we can ever define pain as sweet, but I think what Proloy is reinforcing is exactly what we said, is that the aspiration, or that desire, or the long game that you're playing gives you the motivation to want to keep going through that pain and enduring it. And I think there's a follow-up comment that he makes is, whether it is working out physically or mentally, one will do more of something when you learn to observe these small incremental changes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So, Andrea, as we wrap up today, any final thoughts from either of you?
I think it's been very insightful for me. I'm glad to know that I don't need to be extremely physically active to do something. It is the more important to have commitment and discipline, and I can share that maybe in the future, with art and content creation as well. It's the same thing, but as we end this episode, we'd just like to thank Elaine for sharing her experiences, her expertise, and all this. And she has something else to share with us as well. We have a conference coming up, right? And maybe Elaine, you want to share a bit more about this conference that
Yeah.
people can attend?
Okay, so when Leaderonomics approached me to speak about this, I thought it was very timely because the psychology department at Help is also having a conference on cultivating resilience, and it's for people from all age groups. We also are going to have a school children track where we'll be doing workshops with them on how to build some of these skills that they can put into place to help them learn how to be more resilient. But the conference itself will look at different research into how people have cultivated resilience in the last, especially in the last year and a half when we've gone through this pandemic situation, but also be more future focused on how we can develop resilience and cultivate that in our day-to-day life. So this is open to everyone. You don't have to be an academic to attend. You can be a student, a professional, a working mother, or even a homemaker. Anybody who's interested can absolutely join, and it's free for everyone. So please do consider it. I believe Leaderonomics will be sharing the link as well.
Yep, it's
So
and I think the links are all on the social media, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. The links are available. As we wrap up, I wanted to showcase a comment by Proloy, and he's. I think I feel the same. Right? I've been working out since as far as I can remember to bulk up, no luck, but not given up hope. Hope to continue to do so. Somehow he's working out every morning. Actually, wakes up to happy hormones. I guess let's keep doing this even if you don't see results. Because I think at the end of the day it helps, right? Elaine, your final take. So do register for the conference and look out for the links on your social media feeds. Elaine, your final thoughts as we wrap today up.
Yeah. So I think if you can be physically fit, please be physically fit. There's so much more benefits to it apart from just resilience. But if it's not your thing, it's still okay. There's many ways to cultivate resilience, and the main thing that I want people to remember is that resilience or building resilience is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that you are going to feel like you are all the time, and that's okay. That's part of the process. So self-compassion, being okay with not being okay, those are things that are important to remember as well as you work towards being more resilient.
Okay, and we have a few more comments, but before we go into the comments, I forgot to announce something else. We have a special episode on Psyched next week, in lieu of Malaysia Tech Week by MDEC on the Pearlies and Joy of Technology with Sashi, right? So please tune in next week, same time, and let's look at the last comments, Roshan. That you
maybe we'll take one comment from Kim Hai, who says, thanks for the sharing this session. I can relate to this as he's a martial arts practitioner. There is no loser. The moment when you step into the mats, you're a champ. Then practice and work on improving for the next competition. So, for everyone, keep on physically keeping yourself well and fit. And like I said, sometimes I'm pretty competitive. I play football and badminton relatively competitively, and when I lose, it's not very nice. But I'm learning how to. I learned a very interesting fact the other day, which maybe I'll just share as a closing. I lost this badminton game, and I'm like, but I must beat this guy, right? And then I realized, and we were talking about this last week. In terms of, we choke, right? At a very critical point, we choke. And when I realized it's really related to stress, right? Because we are stressing ourselves out to want to be successful. And then I said, look, I'm going to change my mindset and say, look, it's not must win, it's I'm going to try to win. And I started rephrasing things in my life. And I realized, a lot calmer, you're a lot more relaxed. When you make mistakes, okay, it's a mistake. I'll do better the next time. It really helps significantly. So with that, have fun with your workouts, and I guess they say the EPL season is starting soon. Not that I care about. The team I support never does really well, so it doesn't matter. But that's okay, right? You reframe and say it's okay. There's always next year.
Enjoy the process.
Absolutely, and I think the mirror is a huge problem, especially when you start working out and don't see the results. Throw the mirror away for a year, then buy a new one. So with that, thank you so much, Andrea and Elaine. Your any other final advice that you want to leave with us?
I think we covered everything, Roshan. I think you ended
Fantastic.
really well.
Thanks a lot. We will see you guys, and remember to build a culture of resilience. One of the best tools, I think, is a tool called Happily. So with that, we're going to end with this amazing tool called Happily as we close out this episode on resilience, and especially in terms of physical activity. Goodbye, everyone. See you next Wednesday, same time, same place, here on Psyched.